The screen flickered. Robert's breath stopped. There she was, his wife, half-dressed, smiling, opening the back door, letting him in. The man's hands were on her instantly, gripping, pulling. She didn't resist. She wanted this. Robert's fingers dug into the chair, his vision tunneling. A hushed laugh, a moan. The bedroom lights went out. His stomach twisted. His heart pounded. And then, through the speakers, the sounds began. Part 1. At first, it was nothing unusual. His wife, Lisa, clad in her familiar pink bathrobe, stepping out into the night. She paused, looking around, as if making sure no one was watching. Then, she opened the door. The young neighbor, Chris, appeared in the dim light. Lisa reached for his hand and pulled him inside. The door shut. Robert rewound the footage, played it again and again. Each time, his stomach twisted tighter. Each time, a new piece of himself shattered. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he hesitated. Did he really want to watch what came next? He had already seen enough to break his world apart, but he needed to know. With one slow, deliberate motion, he pressed play. Lisa reappeared in the frame minutes later. This time, her robe was looser, her hair tousled in a way that left no room for doubt. She stood in the doorway, watching as Chris slipped out, straightening his clothes before disappearing into the night. Then she closed the door behind her. Robert froze the frame. The image stared back at him, mocking him, his wife, his partner of nearly 30 years, betraying him in the home they had built together. His breath came in ragged bursts. The pain in his chest spread like wildfire, but his mind remained eerily calm. He should feel rage, devastation, something. But all he felt was a cold emptiness settling into his bones. He stood, his movements mechanical. The chair creaked as he pushed away from the desk. He couldn't be in this room anymore. Couldn't be in this house. Not tonight. Without another thought, he grabbed a flash drive, plugged it in, and copied the footage. Then, he slipped on his coat and stepped outside. The night air was sharp against his skin, but he welcomed the bite of it. He needed to think. He needed to breathe. But one thing was clear. Lisa had made her choice. Now, he would make his. He walked aimlessly through the empty streets, the neon lights of the city painting the pavement in hues of blue and red. His mind raced, replaying the scene over and over like a nightmare that wouldn't fade. How long had it been going on? Had Lisa ever truly loved him? Or had their entire life together been a lie? The questions gnawed at him, each one more painful than the last. He found himself at an all-night diner, the kind with flickering signs and worn-out booths. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, the warmth of the place contrasting with the cold hollowness in his chest. He slid into a booth near the window. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, came over with a notepad. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice kind but distant. "Yeah." "Black," he muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. She nodded and disappeared behind the counter. Robert stared out the window, his thoughts still churning. He had given Lisa everything. His love, his loyalty, his years. And for what? A betrayal that shattered him from the inside out. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting a message from Lisa. Instead, it was an old friend, Mark. The text was simple. "You okay?" Robert hesitated before typing back. "No." A few moments later, his phone buzzed again. "Meet me at the old bar." Robert sighed, pocketed the phone, and finished his coffee in one bitter gulp. He paid the bill and left, his resolve hardening with every step. By the time he reached the bar, Mark was already there, nursing a beer. He looked up as Robert approached, his expression unreadable. "Sit down," Mark said. Robert slid onto the stool beside him, letting out a deep breath. "I saw it with my own eyes, Mark. Lisa and the neighbor." Mark exhaled sharply. "Damn." Robert nodded, staring at the counter. "I don't know what to do." Mark took a sip of his beer before setting it down. "You already do. You just don't want to admit it yet." Robert clenched his jaw. "I don't want to make a scene. I don't want to listen to her excuses. I want to be done." Mark studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then be done. Make your move before she has a chance to manipulate you." Robert tightened his grip on the beer bottle in front of him. He had always been a man of patience, a man who thought things through. But this required action. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket and set it on the counter. I have proof. I don't need to argue. Mark smirked slightly. Then use it. Robert finished his beer, stood up, and clapped Mark on the shoulder. Thanks, man. Mark nodded. Do what you need to do. And if you need anything, call me. Robert left the bar, his steps more certain than they had been all night. Tomorrow, Lisa would wake up to find an envelope on the table. Inside would be divorce papers, the flash drive, and a simple note. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. He wouldn't give her a chance to explain. She didn't deserve it. Part 2. Robert sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly at the empty road ahead. The events of the previous night were replaying in his mind like a haunting refrain. He had made his decision. There was no turning back now. But the weight of it pressed against his chest like a leaden hand. The house was behind him. The house they had built, filled with laughter and love, now tainted with betrayal. He had left the envelope on the dining table, just as he had planned. The flash drive, the divorce papers, and that single note. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. For a fleeting moment, he considered going back, bursting through the front door, confronting Lisa, demanding an explanation that he already knew would be hollow. But no, he had seen it with his own eyes. There was nothing left to question. He turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life beneath him. His hands were steady now. A strange sense of calm had settled over him, though he knew the storm was far from over. He needed to get away, put some distance between himself and the ruins of his marriage. His phone buzzed in the passenger seat. He glanced at the screen. Lisa. Her name glowed against the darkness, an echo of the life he had just abandoned. He let it ring. Then another call. Then a text. Lisa. Robert, please. We need to talk. Please, just come home. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Home? That place was no longer home. It was just a house with walls that had witnessed his humiliation. He put the phone face down, exhaling sharply before pulling onto the road. He drove aimlessly at first, the quiet hum of the tires against the asphalt the only sound in the silence of the night. He passed through familiar streets, places they had gone together. The cafe where they'd spent lazy Sunday mornings. The bookstore she loved. The park where they'd once walked hand in hand. Every memory was a blade against his skin. An hour later, he found himself outside a motel on the outskirts of town. It was nothing fancy, but it would do. He checked in, exchanging pleasantries with the night clerk as if he weren't a man whose life had just crumbled. The key felt cold in his hand as he made his way to the room. The moment he stepped inside, he let out a long breath, his body sagging against the door. He was exhausted, drained. He tossed his jacket onto the chair and collapsed onto the bed. His mind, though, refused to rest. What had gone wrong? How had he missed it? He had trusted Lisa implicitly. Even when she started taking longer walks, even when she begun dressing differently, even when her laughter had started sounding different, he had convinced himself it was nothing. He had trusted her, and she had taken that trust and crushed it under her heel. The room was silent save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. His eyes burned, but no tears came. He had passed that point. Now there was only emptiness, an abyss stretching wide before him. Another buzz. His phone vibrated on the nightstand. More messages. More pleas. But then, Lisa, you don't understand. It wasn't what you think. A sharp, humorless chuckle left his throat. He sat up, staring at the words glowing on the screen. Wasn't what he thought? He had seen it. There was no misunderstanding. There was only betrayal. He typed a single response. I saw everything. The dots appeared almost instantly. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then reappeared. Then nothing. Good. Let her sit with that. He threw the phone onto the bed and ran a hand over his face. He needed a drink. A strong one. He grabbed his keys and left the room, walking down the street until he found a small bar still open despite the late hour. Inside, the dim lighting cast shadows across the few patrons hunched over their drinks. He took a seat at the bar, nodding to the bartender. Whiskey. Neat. The glass was in front of him within moments. He wrapped his fingers around it, staring at the amber liquid before taking a slow sip. The burn in his throat was welcome. Something real, something tangible, something that didn't lie. Rough night? The bartender, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, leaned against the counter. Robert exhaled sharply. You could say that. She nodded, as if she'd heard it all before. Want to talk about it? He considered it. Considered spilling everything to this stranger who had no stake in his life, who would listen without judgment. But the words wouldn't come. Not much to say, he muttered, taking another sip. Just ended a 25-year marriage in one night. She raised an eyebrow. That's plenty to say. He shook his head. I saw it with my own eyes. My wife. With another man. Our neighbor, no less. The bartender winced. Damn, that's tough. Robert let out a bitter laugh. Yeah. So what now? She asked, wiping down the counter. That was the question, wasn't it? What now? He had spent so long being Lisa's husband that he had forgotten what it was like to just be Robert. The idea of starting over at 55 was daunting. But what choice did he have? He finished his drink, setting the glass down with finality. Now? I figure out who I am without her. The bartender smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. That's a good place to start. Robert nodded, pulling a few bills from his wallet and placing them on the counter. He stood, feeling the weight of the past few hours settle differently in his bones. Lighter, in a way. He had made his choice. Now, he had to live with it. And for the first time since pressing play on that cursed footage, he felt something close to peace. Part 3. The morning sun streamed through the cheap motel curtains, casting long, golden streaks across the room. Robert blinked awake, his body aching from a night of restless sleep. The events of the past 24 hours crashed over him like a relentless tide. His wife, the neighbor, the betrayal, the note he had left behind, the unanswered messages. He sighed heavily and sat up, rubbing his face. He had no plan, no clear direction of what came next. All he knew was that he couldn't stay in this motel forever. He needed to figure out his next steps. His phone lay on the nightstand, still buzzing periodically with messages from Lisa. He picked it up, hesitating before unlocking it. More missed calls, more unread texts. Lisa. Robert, please. Just talk to me, Lisa. I swear. It's not what you think. Just give me a chance to explain. Lisa, where are you? I'm worried. He clenched his jaw. She was worried? Worried about what? Losing face? Losing the comfortable life they had built? Losing the man who had devoted nearly 3 decades to loving her? The thought made his blood simmer. He didn't bother responding. Instead, he scrolled to another name in his contacts and tapped the call button. Hey man, Mark's familiar voice answered after just one ring. I was hoping you'd call. Robert exhaled. Yeah, I need a place to crash for a bit. I can't stay in this damn motel much longer. You got it, Mark said without hesitation. My guest room's yours for as long as you need. Get your ass over here. We'll figure things out. Thanks, Robert muttered, already standing and pulling his duffel bag from the floor. I owe you. You don't owe me shit. Just get here safe. Mark's house was about 30 minutes away, nestled in a quiet suburb. Robert had known him since college, and over the years, their friendship had endured, even as life pulled them in different directions. Mark was one of the few people Robert trusted completely. When he arrived, Mark was waiting at the door, a beer in hand. You look like hell. Robert chuckled bitterly. Feel like it too. Mark clapped him on the shoulder. Come in. Got food, got beer, and I cleared out the guest room. You're staying as long as you need. Robert stepped inside, inhaling the comforting scent of coffee and something frying in the kitchen. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sliver of relief. They settled in the living room, beers in hand. Mark didn't push, didn't prod. He just sat there, waiting for Robert to speak on his own terms. Finally, Robert exhaled. I saw her, Mark. With Chris. Mark's expression darkened. Bastard. Yeah. Robert took a long swig of beer. I left her a note, the divorce papers, and the video on a flash drive. Walked out before she could say a word. Mark let out a low whistle. Damn. Cold. but deserved. She keeps texting me, Robert admitted. Says it's not what I think. Wants to explain. Mark snorted. What's there to explain? You saw it with your own eyes. You have proof. She can't talk her way out of this. Robert ran a hand through his graying hair. I know, but part of me, I don't know. Part of me wants to hear it. Just to know how long it's been going on. How much of our life together was a lie. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let me ask you this. What would knowing change? Would it make the betrayal hurt less? Would it make leaving her any easier? Robert sighed. Probably not. Then why the hell give her the satisfaction of explaining? She made her bed. Let her lie in it. Robert nodded slowly. Mark was right. Lisa had already made her choice. Now, he had to stick to his. The next few days were a blur. Robert stayed with Mark, spending his time working out logistics. He spoke to a lawyer, started making arrangements to divide assets, and reached out to mutual friends to explain what had happened. Most were shocked. A few admitted they had suspected something was off with Lisa for a while, but had never wanted to say anything. He also applied for a temporary lease on a small apartment. Staying with Mark indefinitely wasn't an option, and he needed a space of his own to start over. Each day, Lisa's messages became more desperate. Lisa, Robert, please. I made a mistake, but it's not what you think. I swear. Lisa, you won't even give me a chance to explain? Lisa, I still love you. Doesn't that mean anything? Lisa, I can't believe you're just walking away from this. From us. Each message chipped away at him, but he never responded. The temptation was there, to demand answers, to confront her, to make her hurt the way she had hurt him. But he refused to give her that power. Then, on the 5th day, the messages stopped. Robert stared at his phone, an uneasy feeling settling in his gut. Had she given up? Moved on? Or was she planning something? He wasn't sure which option unsettled him more. That evening, Mark was cooking steaks when the doorbell rang. Expecting someone? Mark asked, flipping a steak. No, Robert said, frowning. He set his beer down and walked to the door. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Lisa stood there, eyes red and swollen, clutching a manila envelope in her trembling hands. Robert, she whispered, voice raw. Please, just read this. She extended the envelope toward him. He stared at it, then at her. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the silent plea. He had promised himself he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of an explanation, but something about her expression sent a chill down his spine. Slowly, he reached out and took the envelope. Lisa swallowed hard. I know you don't owe me anything, but after you read this, if you still want me out of your life, I'll go. Robert didn't respond. He just nodded and shut the door. Mark walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. What was that about? Robert held up the envelope, his stomach twisting. I don't know, but I think I need to find out. He turned it over, hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a letter, and as he began to read, his entire world tilted on its axis. Part 4. Robert sat at the dining table in Mark's house, the manila envelope resting before him like a silent challenge. The air felt thick with unspoken words as Mark leaned against the kitchen counter, watching but saying nothing. The weight of what lay inside that envelope was suffocating, but Robert knew he had to open it. With steady hands, he tore it open, pulling out a handwritten letter and a few folded documents. Lisa's familiar cursive sprawled across the first page, uneven in places, as if written in a hurry or under duress. Robert, if you're reading this, then you haven't completely shut me out yet. And for that, I am grateful. I know you don't owe me anything, not even the time it takes to read this letter, but I need you to understand something before you walk away forever. There is something I never told you, something I should have told you years ago. And while it won't change what I've done, I hope you will at least understand why. Robert's jaw tightened. He didn't want excuses. He wanted the truth, unfiltered and unembellished. He turned to the next page. Chris is not my lover. He never was. Robert's heart stuttered. He blinked at the words, disbelief flooding his mind. Had he misread? He read it again. Not my lover? He continued reading, his breath slow and measured. I met Chris 6 months ago, shortly after his mother passed away. He came to me because he had nowhere else to turn. You always wondered why I spent so much time out of the house, why I seemed distant. I wasn't running from you, Robert. I was trying to help him. Chris isn't just our neighbor. He's my son. Robert froze. The words blurred as a sharp ringing filled his ears. Son? His fingers clenched the edge of the paper. Mark, who had been watching quietly, straightened. What is it? Robert shook his head, trying to process. The room spun. He inhaled sharply and forced himself to keep reading. I was young when I had him. Too young. I was scared and alone, and my parents made the decision for me. I was sent away, and when I came back, they told me he had been adopted. I was never supposed to know where he ended up, but fate had other plans. He moved in next door, Robert. And I recognized him instantly. Robert felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. Lisa had a child? Before me? His hands shook as he unfolded the accompanying documents. Birth certificate, adoption records, DNA results, proof. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of what you'd think. Afraid of what it meant for our life together. But I couldn't ignore him, not when he was grieving, not when he had no one else. I made a terrible mistake by not telling you. And for that, I am so sorry. But please, Robert, believe me when I say I never betrayed you in the way you think I did. I love you. That has never changed. Robert exhaled shakily. His world had tilted, shifting everything he thought he knew. Lisa wasn't cheating. She had been reconnecting with the son she had lost. Mark placed a hand on his shoulder. You okay, man? Robert didn't answer. He wasn't sure what he felt. Anger, relief, sorrow, all clashed inside him. After a long moment, he set the letter down carefully. I need to see her. The drive back to their home was both familiar and foreign. The roads he had driven countless times felt different now. His grip on the wheel was tight, knuckles white, his heart pounding in his chest. He had left that house thinking it was the place of his greatest betrayal. Now, he wasn't sure what to think. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw Lisa sitting on the front porch, hands clasped in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with uncertainty. He stepped out of the car, the letter still clutched in his hand. Robert, she breathed, standing slowly. You read it. I did, he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. She swallowed hard. And? Robert hesitated. He had spent days building up anger, preparing to cut her out of his life completely. But now? Now he didn't know what he wanted. Why didn't you tell me? His voice wasn't as sharp as he intended, but the hurt in it was unmistakable. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. Because I was afraid. Afraid of how you'd see me. Afraid that you'd think I was lying, or that I had kept too big of a secret for too long. And I was ashamed. I didn't want you to look at me differently. Robert took a slow step closer. I saw you with him, Lisa. I saw you bring him inside. I saw the way you looked at him. Like a mother looks at her son, she whispered. Because that's what I am. I didn't plan for this, Robert. I didn't expect him to show up in my life, but when he did, I couldn't walk away from him. I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought I could fix everything before you ever had to know. But I did find out, Robert said, and it nearly destroyed me. Lisa let out a broken sob. I know, and I can't take that back. But I never cheated, Robert. I never loved anyone but you. Please, you have to believe that. Silence stretched between them. The anger had faded, but the wound was still fresh. I don't know what to do with this, Robert admitted, shaking his head. I don't know how to move forward. Lisa reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his. Then let's figure it out together. Please. Robert looked at her, searching her face for deception, for any sign of a lie. But all he saw was sincerity, pain, love. For the first time since he had watched that damn video, he wasn't sure if walking away was the right choice. And that terrified him more than anything. Part 5. Robert stood frozen on the front porch, Lisa's hand still lightly touching his. The weight of everything, the betrayal he thought he'd seen, the truth he had just uncovered, the years they had spent together, pressed against his chest. He had expected finality when he walked away, had braced himself for the certainty of divorce. But now, uncertainty loomed before him. Lisa took a shaky breath, her fingers gripping his just a little tighter. I know I can't change what I did, Robert. I can't take back the lies or the secrets. But I need you to know, I didn't do this to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. Robert pulled his hand back, running it over his face. I don't know what you want me to say, Lisa. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. One moment, I was sure my marriage was over. Now, I don't know anything. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I understand. And if you need time, I'll give it to you. If you need space, I'll give you that too. But please, Robert, don't make a decision tonight. Let's talk. Let's figure this out. He stared at her, wanting to find anger within himself, to hold on to the certainty he had carried these past few days. But it wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was just exhaustion, confusion, and the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth salvaging. I don't know if I can forgive you, he admitted quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Lisa swallowed hard but nodded. I understand. But if you're willing to try, if you want to even consider it, then I'll do whatever it takes. He sighed, glancing past her into the house, the home they had built together. Could he really just walk away from it all? From the decades they had shared, the life they had built? I need to think, he finally said. I need time. Lisa nodded again. Take all the time you need. Just don't shut me out completely. He didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. Instead, he turned, descending the steps and heading back toward his car. He had no destination in mind, only the need to escape, to breathe. Robert drove aimlessly for hours. The city lights blurred past him as his thoughts churned. His mind replayed every moment, finding the footage, the days of anger, the pain, the truth he had never expected. He had spent years thinking he knew his wife completely, yet she had hidden something so monumental from him. Could he ever truly trust her again? Eventually, he found himself parked near the waterfront, the waves lapping gently against the shore. He stepped out of the car, the crisp night air filling his lungs. He needed clarity, but it eluded him. As he stood there, staring at the horizon, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting another message from Lisa, but it wasn't her. It was Mark. Mark, you okay? Robert hesitated before typing back. Robert, I don't know. A moment later, the phone rang. He answered without a word, listening as Mark exhaled on the other end. You want my advice? Mark asked finally. Always. Take the time you need, but don't let pride make your decision for you. If there's even a chance you can forgive her, really forgive her, then don't throw everything away just to prove a point. But if you can't, then walk away for good. No half measures. Robert closed his eyes, nodding to himself. I hear you. Good. And whatever you decide, I've got your back. A small, grateful smile touched Robert's lips. I know. They spoke for a few more minutes before Robert ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He took one last look at the water, then turned and got back into his car. It was time to decide. By the time Robert returned home, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the living room lamp. Lisa was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her, eyes red-rimmed from crying. She sat up as soon as he entered, searching his face for any sign of what he had decided. He stood there, staring at her, his heart pounding. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you completely, he admitted. And I don't know if we'll ever be the same. Lisa held her breath, nodding, waiting. But I'm willing to try, he finished. A sob of relief escaped her lips, and she covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you. Robert exhaled, feeling the weight of the past few days begin to lift, just slightly. I'm not making any promises, Lisa, but I can't pretend that none of this meant anything, that our life together meant nothing. She nodded again, wiping at her face. That's enough. That's all I need. He stepped forward, slowly, hesitantly, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope. Maybe they could heal. Maybe they couldn't. But at least they would try. And that was more than he had thought possible just days ago.